The silence in our home wasn't the peaceful kind, not anymore. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, the kind that settles after a devastating storm, when you're too afraid to look at the wreckage. Sarah, my wife, lay in bed, pale and still, the very picture of a grieving mother, a broken woman. She'd told me, just 3 days before, her voice choked with what I believed were real tears. The baby. Mark, the baby's gone. We lost our baby. My world hadn't just cracked then. It had imploded, shattered into a million razor-sharp pieces that seemed to embed themselves in my very soul. I'd held her, rocked her, whispered promises that we'd get through it, that I was there, that our love was strong enough. But now, standing in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her sleep with this strange, almost serene look on her face, a different, more terrifying thought began to claw its way into my mind, a sliver of ice piercing through the fog of my grief. Was any of it real? Was any of what she told me true? Something in her eyes when she was awake, a flicker I'd never seen before, a shadow that wasn't just grief, had planted a seed of unease, a cold dread that was now coiling itself around my heart like a venomous snake. My name is Mark. I'm an architect, or at least I was before all this. Sarah and I had been married for 7 years. 7 years. We met in our late 20s, a whirlwind romance that settled into what I thought was a comfortable, loving partnership. We built a life, bought a house in a quiet suburb, the kind with tree-lined streets and kids playing in the yards. We were that couple, the ones friends pointed to and said, "See, that's what we want." I genuinely believed we were happy. We'd been trying for a baby for the last year, and when Sarah told me she was pregnant 2 months ago, it felt like the final piece of our perfect puzzle had clicked into place. I was ecstatic. Over the moon doesn't even begin to cover it. I started planning the nursery in my head, sketching out designs, imagining tiny clothes and lullabies. Sarah seemed thrilled too, a little more reserved perhaps, but I put it down to nerves, the enormity of it all. Looking back, though, the signs were there, tiny little red flags I'd dismissed, painted over with the brush of my own naive optimism. She'd become more private. Her phone, once casually left on the coffee table, was now always screened down, clutched in her hand or tucked away. She'd changed the password, shrugging it off as a security update. There were more late nights at the office, more girls' nights out, with friends I'd never met or barely knew. She'd insisted on going to her initial OB/GYN appointments alone, saying she wanted it to be her thing for a bit, to process it. I'd respected that, thinking it was just her way. God, I was such a fool. Such a blind, trusting fool. The miscarriage, as she called it, had happened suddenly. She'd called me from home, hysterical, saying she was in terrible pain, bleeding. I'd raced back, my heart pounding in my chest, a primal fear gripping me. By the time I got there, she was curled up on the bathroom floor, sobbing. She said it was over, that she'd passed everything. She refused to go to the hospital, adamant that the worst was done and she just wanted to be in her own bed. "There's nothing they can do, Mark," she'd cried. "It's too late." I'd wanted to call an ambulance, a doctor, anyone, but she was so distressed, so insistent, I'd eventually relented, helping her to bed, feeling utterly helpless, my own grief a raw, gaping wound. For 3 days, I'd catered to her every need, tiptoeing around the house, speaking in hushed tones, my own sorrow a constant ache. I called our parents, our closest friends, shared the devastating news. The outpouring of sympathy was immense, but it all felt distant, like I was watching my life fall apart from outside my own body. But the inconsistencies, they started as tiny whispers in the back of my mind, then grew louder, more insistent. She'd mentioned being about 10 weeks along, but some of her earlier comments about dates didn't quite add up. When I gently asked about seeing her doctor for a follow-up, she'd become strangely evasive, saying she'd talked to them on the phone, and they'd said it wasn't necessary unless complications arose. She seemed to be recovering physically with an almost unsettling speed. The profound, soul-crushing exhaustion I'd expected to see in her was less. There was sadness, yes, but it was often punctuated by long periods where she'd be scrolling through her phone, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. It was that smile, seen in a fleeting moment when she thought I wasn't looking, that first sent a real jolt of alarm through me. It wasn't the smile of a grieving woman. The discovery happened by accident, as these things often do. I was looking for a misplaced insurance card in her purse, a mundane task in the midst of our supposed shared tragedy. Tucked into a side pocket, almost hidden, was a folded piece of paper. It wasn't an insurance card. It was a receipt. A crisp, clinical-looking receipt from a place called Evergreen Women's Wellness Center, a clinic I'd never heard of, located in a town nearly an hour away. The date on it was 5 days ago, 2 days before her supposed miscarriage. My blood ran cold. My hands started to shake. The procedure listed wasn't for miscarriage management. The words burned into my retinas: surgical termination of pregnancy. And beneath it, in the space for emergency contact, a name that wasn't mine. It was a name I didn't recognize, a name that felt like a punch to the gut: David Keller. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. The air rushed out of my lungs. Termination. Not a miscarriage. She hadn't lost the baby. She had chosen to end the pregnancy. And who the hell was David Keller? The name echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of my mind. This wasn't just about a lost baby, a tragic, unavoidable act of nature. This was about a deliberate act, a web of deceit so intricate, so cruel, it was almost incomprehensible. The pain that ripped through me was different from the grief I'd felt before. This was the pain of betrayal, so profound, so absolute. It threatened to obliterate me. Every moment of her grief, every tear she'd shed in my arms, every whispered word of sorrow. Had it all been a performance? A monstrous, calculated lie? The loving wife, grieving for our lost child, was a phantom, a figment of my imagination. In her place was a stranger, a woman capable of a deception so cold, so heartless, it defied belief. I stumbled out of the bedroom, the receipt clutched in my hand like damning evidence. My mind a maelstrom of confusion, rage, and a grief that was now 10 times heavier, poisoned by the venom of betrayal. She was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water, humming softly, a sound that now seemed grotesque, almost mocking. She looked up, a small, sad smile on her face, the kind she'd been perfecting for days. "Oh, hey honey, I was just getting..." Her voice trailed off as she saw my face, saw the paper in my hand. The color drained from her cheeks. The mask of sorrow flickered, and for a split second, I saw something else. Pure, unadulterated panic. My voice, when I finally found it, was a hoarse whisper, trembling with the force of the cataclysm raging inside me. "Sarah, what is this?" I held up the receipt, my hand shaking so violently the paper rattled. Evergreen Women's Wellness Center? Surgical termination? And who the hell is David Keller? The carefully constructed facade of our life, our love, our shared loss, shattered in that instant, the pieces falling around us like shards of broken glass, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. Her eyes, wide with a fear that finally seemed genuine, darted from the receipt to my face, and in that suffocating silence, the unspoken truth hung heavy in the air, a truth that was about to unleash a hell I could never have imagined. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, like a fish gasping for air. The carefully constructed performance of the grieving wife, the one I'd been tending to with such misguided devotion, dissolved before my very eyes, replaced by the raw, unfiltered panic of a cornered animal. "Mark, I can explain," she stammered, her voice barely a squeak, a pathetic imitation of the confident woman I thought I knew. The glass of water slipped from her trembling hand, shattering on the kitchen tiles, the sound like a gunshot in the sudden, unbearable tension. It was almost symbolic, the pieces of her composure scattering just like the shards on the floor. "Explain?" I echoed, my voice rising, no longer a whisper but a raw, ragged sound that seemed to tear from my throat. "Explain what, Sarah? Explain how our miscarriage was actually a scheduled procedure at a clinic an hour away? Explain how you looked me in the eye, day after day, and lied about losing our child? Explain whose baby it really was? Because this David Keller on the emergency contact, that's not a name I recognize from our Lamaze class list, is it?" Each question was like a hammer blow, and I could see her flinching, wilting under the weight of them. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a white-hot fury, a rage so intense it felt like it was burning me from the inside out. The grief for the baby I thought we'd lost was still there, a dull, throbbing ache, but it was now intertwined with this monstrous, consuming anger at her deception. "It's not what you think," she finally managed, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. "It was complicated. I was scared, Mark. I didn't know what to do. Scared." I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You were scared? So you concocted this elaborate, cruel charade? You let me grieve for a child you chose to get rid of? You let me hold you, comfort you, while you were mourning a lie. What kind of person does that, Sarah?" Her face crumpled, and the tears started, but this time, they didn't move me. They looked like the tears of a child caught with their hand in the cookie jar, not the profound sorrow of a woman who had done something morally reprehensible. I had to," she sobbed. "You wouldn't have understood." "Understood what? That you were pregnant with another man's child?" The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. She didn't deny it. Her silence was the confirmation I dreaded but somehow already knew was coming. The affair. The termination. The faked miscarriage to cover it all up. It was a trifecta of betrayal so complete, so devastating, it left me reeling. "He meant nothing, Mark," she pleaded, reaching out a hand towards me, a hand I recoiled from as if it were diseased. "It was a mistake, a stupid, terrible mistake. David, he was just someone from work. We got too close. It just happened." "Happened?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "Things like this don't just happen, Sarah. This was a choice. A series of choices. You chose to have an affair. You chose to get pregnant with his child. You chose to terminate that pregnancy. And then, worst of all, you chose to lie to me in the most despicable way imaginable, to make me a participant in your grotesque play. You made me mourn a fiction you created." The sheer audacity of it, the calculated cruelty, was breathtaking. I could feel the last vestiges of the man I was, the loving, trusting husband, dying inside me, replaced by someone colder, harder. I didn't wait for more excuses, more lies. I couldn't stand to be in the same room as her, breathing the same air, contaminated by her deceit. I turned on my heel and walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, grabbing my keys and wallet on the way. I just drove, no destination in mind, the cityscape blurring past my tear-filled eyes, her pathetic pleas echoing in my ears. The next few days were a blur of numb disbelief and agonizing clarity. I stayed at my friend Tom's place, a friend who listened without judgment as I poured out the sordid, unbelievable tale. The missed signs now screamed at me in hindsight, the late nights that were never about work, the hushed phone calls she'd taken another room, the sudden interest in new lingerie that clearly wasn't for my benefit. The emotional distance I'd attributed to pregnancy hormones. It was all there, a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly to this hell, and I'd been too blind, too trusting, too invested in the fantasy of our perfect life to see it. Sarah, of course, didn't just let me go. My phone blew up with calls, texts filled with desperate apologies, manipulative pleas, and even veiled threats about what this would do to us. "Don't throw away 7 years, Mark," one text read. "I made a mistake, but I love you. We can get through this. Please, let's talk." She even had her mother call me, a woman I'd always respected, who now tried to guilt-trip me, telling me Sarah was a broken woman and that I needed to be compassionate, to forgive. Compassion? Forgiveness? They felt like alien concepts when the wound was so fresh, so gaping. Her family clearly didn't know the full extent of the depravity. Sarah had likely fed them a heavily edited version of events, painting herself as the victim. And then there was David Keller. The name haunted me. Through some discreet inquiries Tom helped me with, a quick search on social media linked to her workplace, we found him. He was a senior manager in her company, married, with 2 young kids. The betrayal deepened, a sickening lurch in my stomach. This wasn't just an attack on our marriage. It was an affair that could shatter another family too. Did his wife know? Did he know about Sarah's elaborate miscarriage lie? Was he a willing participant in this charade? The questions gnawed at me. For a moment, a dark, vengeful part of me wanted to blow his life apart, to tell his wife everything. But Tom, ever the voice of reason, advised caution. "Get your ducks in a row first, Mark. Don't act on raw emotion. You need a plan." And so, the planning began. The initial shock and rage started to solidify into a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just about getting a divorce anymore. This was about ensuring Sarah faced the full consequences of her actions, not just the affair, but the deliberate, malicious emotional torture she'd inflicted with the faked miscarriage. I met with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright whom Tom recommended. I laid out the whole story, the receipt from the clinic, the text I'd managed to retrieve from our shared cloud backup before Sarah could delete them, texts between her and David that sickeningly detailed their trysts and, chillingly, discussed the miscarriage story. As a way to handle the Mark situation, after she found out she was pregnant with David's child. They had planned it. Planned my grief. Ms. Albright's eyes narrowed as she reviewed the evidence. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice devoid of emotion but carrying an undercurrent of steel, "what your wife has done is not just grounds for divorce on the basis of adultery. The deception surrounding the fake miscarriage constitutes extreme emotional cruelty. This is heinous. We can leverage this significantly, not just in the division of assets, but to ensure her reputation reflects the truth of her character, should you wish to pursue that." A grim satisfaction settled in me. She thought she could manipulate me, play me for a fool, and then cry her way back into my life? She had no idea who she was dealing with now. The man she married might have been compassionate to a fault, but the man she created with her lies was someone entirely different. He was methodical, calculating, and he was done being a victim. The plan began to take shape. First, secure all financial information. Document everything. Ms. Albright advised me to quietly separate our finances as much as legally possible before formally serving her with papers. I started gathering more evidence, meticulously building a timeline of her deceit, cross-referencing her work trips with hotel charges on statements I found, her doctor's appointments with the damning clinic receipt. Each piece of evidence was like another nail in the coffin of the life we once shared, and strangely, with each nail, I felt a little stronger, a little more in control. Sarah, meanwhile, was escalating her attempts at contact, her tone shifting from pleading to demanding, then back to tearful apologies. She even showed up at Tom's apartment once, creating a scene, begging me to come home, swearing David meant nothing and that the baby, well, she stumbled over her words about the baby, never quite admitting the full truth of her deception to my face, still trying to minimize it. I refused to see her, letting Tom handle it. Her act was wearing thin, even for an outside observer. The next step was the confrontation, but not with her, not yet. Ms. Albright suggested a different approach. We knew Sarah's family, particularly her parents, prided themselves on their moral standing, their community involvement. What would they think if they knew the full story? The unvarnished, brutal truth? My lawyer looked at the compiled evidence, the damning text where Sarah and David discussed the miscarriage alibi in cold, practical terms, the clinic receipt, the timeline of her lies. Ms. Albright tapped a pin on the file. She's portrayed herself as a victim in a complicated situation to her family. I'd wager. It's time they understood the full scope of her performance. A cold resolve settled in my gut. She wanted to play games with life and death, with love and trust? Fine. But she was about to find out that the game had rules and consequences. The next move wouldn't be a direct confrontation with Sarah in the heat of the moment. It would be calculated. It would be precise. And it would strip away her support system before she even knew what hit her. The storm was just beginning, and Sarah had no idea the hurricane she had unleashed. The first phase of the plan unfolded with a chilling precision that surprised even me. Ms. Albright drafted a letter, not to Sarah, but to her parents. It was concise, factual, and utterly devastating. It laid out the timeline of Sarah's affair with David Keller, the subsequent pregnancy, the termination at the Evergreen Women's Wellness Center, and, most damningly, the calculated decision to fake a miscarriage. Complete with copies of the clinic receipt and a few carefully selected, undeniable text message exchanges between Sarah and David discussing their plan to manage me and the unfortunate complication of the pregnancy. We sent it via registered mail, requiring a signature. The silence that followed from their end was deafening for about 48 hours. Then, the dam broke. It wasn't Sarah who called me, but her father. His voice, usually so jovial and warm, was hollow, laced with a profound, shaken disbelief and an undercurrent of fury that wasn't directed at me. "Mark," he began, his voice cracking, "we received a letter from your lawyer. Tell me it's not true. Please." I spent over an hour on the phone with him, calmly, methodically walking him through the evidence, the sequence of events, the soul-crushing impact of Sarah's sustained deception. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The truth was monstrous enough. I heard his wife, Sarah's mother, weeping in the background. By the end of the call, Mr. Peterson was audibly shaken, apologizing profusely for Sarah's actions, for the call his wife had made to me earlier. He said, his voice heavy with shame, "She is no longer the daughter we thought we raised." I don't know what to say, Mark. We are so sorry. This is unthinkable. He assured me they would be speaking to Sarah, that this was not something they could or would condone. Her primary support system, her parental safety net, had just been vaporized by the irrefutable truth. The next step was serving Sarah with the divorce papers. Ms. Albright arranged for a process server to deliver them to her at her workplace. I wasn't there, but I heard about it later. Apparently, Sarah was in a team meeting, ironically probably with David Keller in the same room, when the server walked in and handed her the thick manila envelope. The public nature of it, the interruption, the stark legal documents, it was designed to rattle her, to make her understand this wasn't a private disagreement we could just talk through. The papers didn't just cite adultery, they detailed, in cold, legal terms, the intentional infliction of extreme emotional distress through the faked miscarriage, referencing the evidence we had. We weren't just asking for a divorce. We were making it clear that her conduct was beyond the pale and would have significant financial and personal repercussions. Her reaction was predictable, yet still somehow shocking in its intensity. The desperate texts and voicemails resumed, but now they were tinged with a wild, frantic energy. Accusations. How could you do this to me? Humiliate me like this? Followed by abject pleading. Mark, please, I'll do anything. Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll go to therapy, anything. And then threats, you'll regret this. You're destroying my life. She tried to rally mutual friends, but the story, or at least strong rumors of its heinous nature, had begun to circulate, likely fueled by her own family's horror and disgust. People were distancing themselves. The carefully curated image of perfect Sarah was crumbling into dust. And David Keller? His response was cowardly, but equally predictable. Once the divorce papers were served and it became clear I knew everything and wasn't backing down, he went into self-preservation mode. I never confronted him directly. Ms. Albright advised against it, saying it could complicate the legal proceedings. However, the fallout at their workplace was apparently swift. While I don't know the exact details, whispers reached me that an internal investigation was launched due to unprofessional conduct and the potential for a hostile work environment. Given Sarah's now very public and messy divorce implicating a senior manager, David, it seemed, was more concerned with saving his own skin and his own marriage. If his wife didn't already know, she was likely about to find out from the corporate gossip mill or Sarah herself in a desperate attempt to drag him down with her. Then with supporting the woman he'd had an affair with. He reportedly started distancing himself from Sarah immediately, both professionally and personally. She was truly on her own. The peak confrontation, when it came, wasn't a screaming match. It was far more devastating for her. Ms. Albright had requested a settlement meeting. Sarah arrived with a hairy-looking lawyer who seemed utterly out of his depth. She looked terrible, pale, eyes red-rimmed, a stark contrast to the composed, if deceitful, woman I'd known. She tried to make eye contact with me, a pleading, desperate look in her eyes. I met her gaze with cool indifference. Ms. Albright laid out our terms. Given the egregious nature of Sarah's deception and the documented emotional distress, we weren't aiming for a simple 50-50 split. We pushed for a division of assets that heavily favored me, citing the money spent during the affair, which we tracked through credit card statements Sarah had foolishly left trails of, and compensation for the emotional damage. More than the money, though, was the clause about a public apology, not to me, but a written acknowledgement of her deceit to be shared with her family, as a condition of a slightly less punitive financial settlement. Her lawyer blanched. Sarah just stared, her face ashen. This is punitive, her lawyer sputtered. This is a reflection of your client's choices, counselor, Ms. Albright responded calmly. She orchestrated a campaign of lies that caused profound harm. This settlement acknowledges that harm. Sarah finally spoke, her voice a choked whisper. Mark, please. Don't do this. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I know I messed up. I was lost. Scared. Lost? Scared. I finally spoke, my voice steady, devoid of the rage that had once consumed me, replaced by a chilling emptiness when I looked at her. You weren't lost, Sarah. You were calculated. You weren't scared. You were cruel. You didn't just have an affair. You didn't just terminate a pregnancy. You faked a miscarriage. You made me mourn a child that never was, a child you chose to eliminate because it was inconvenient to your affair. You watched me grieve. You let me comfort you. You planned it with him. Do you have any idea, any concept, of the depth of that betrayal? The sickness of it? Tears streamed down her face. I do now, she whispered, her shoulders shaking. I see it now. I've lost everything. My family. They won't even speak to me. David, he's gone. He wants nothing to do with me. My job is on the line. My friends. I have no one. You have the choices you made. Sarah, I said, my voice flat. You built this reality for yourself. You systematically dismantled everything good we had, everything I believed in, for what? For him? For a cheap thrill? Was it worth it? She looked at me then, a raw, agonizing realization dawning in her eyes. It wasn't just the loss of her support systems or her reputation. It was the dawning understanding of what she had truly thrown away, not just a comfortable life, but someone who had genuinely loved her, cherished her. Someone she had irrevocably broken. No, she choked out. No, it wasn't worth it. I was a fool. I destroyed everything. I destroyed you. We're done here, Sarah, I said, standing up. Sign the papers. Accept the terms. Or we go to court, and I promise you, every sordid detail of your deception, every text message, every lie, will become a matter of public record. Your choice. I didn't look back as I walked out of the conference room, Ms. Albright beside me. The immediate aftermath was telling. Within a week, her lawyer contacted Ms. Albright. Sarah had agreed to all our terms. She had lost her job shortly after the settlement meeting, the company citing irreconcilable trust issues. Her parents maintained their distance, offering her basic shelter but little emotional support, deeply ashamed and horrified by what she'd done. David Keller, I heard, was transferred to a different, less prestigious branch of his company, his own career significantly damaged, his marriage reportedly hanging by a thread. Sarah was isolated, her reputation in tatters, facing the stark reality of the life she had single-handedly torched. I walked out of Ms. Albright's office that final day after signing the last of the papers feeling hollow, but undeniably lighter. The storm had indeed passed, leaving a landscape of devastation in its wake, but the oppressive weight of her lies, of her presence in my life, was finally lifted. The legal battles were over. The question that hung in the air wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. What now? Could I ever truly heal from this? Could I ever rebuild a life from the ashes of such a profound betrayal? The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, it felt like my own. Almost 2 years have passed since that final, grim meeting in the lawyer's office, 2 years since the ink dried on the divorce papers that officially severed me from Sarah and the vortex of deceit she had created. 2 years is a long time, and yet, in some ways, it feels like only yesterday that my world was collapsing around me. The dust has settled now, though, and the long-term consequences of her actions and my own subsequent choices have become starkly clear. Life has a funny way of moving on, whether you're ready for it or not. From what I've heard through the grapevine, mostly snippets from former mutual acquaintances who still occasionally cross paths with people who know her, Sarah's life is a pale shadow of what it once was. After losing her job and effectively being disowned by most of her family and friends, she had to sell the car I'd primarily paid for and eventually moved out of our marital home, which was awarded to me in the settlement given the circumstances. She ended up in a small, rundown apartment in a less desirable part of a neighboring state, trying to piece together a living with low-wage jobs, a far cry from the comfortable lifestyle and promising career she'd torched. The shame, apparently, follows her like a shadow. I heard she tried to reach out to her parents more earnestly about 6 months ago, full of apologies and pleas for forgiveness. But while they haven't completely shut her out of their lives from a distance, the trust, the warmth, is gone, replaced by a pained, weary obligation. She's reportedly very isolated, her vibrant social life extinguished. Karma, as they say, can be a relentless accountant. As for David Keller, his karma wasn't much kinder. His wife did leave him, taking their children, and his career stalled permanently. He and Sarah, as far as anyone knows, never reconnected. Their sordid little affair left nothing but wreckage in its wake for both of them. Occasionally, very occasionally, an email from an unfamiliar address will land in my spam folder. It's always her. Long, rambling messages filled with regret, self-pity, and pleas for me to understand, to forgive, to just acknowledge her. I've never replied. Not out of lingering anger, really, but because there's simply nothing left to say. Her apologies, even if sincere now, can't undo the unique horror of what she did. Faking a miscarriage, manipulating my deepest emotions, turning a sacred hope into a tool for her deceit. That's a scar that doesn't just fade with an "I'm sorry." It's a fundamental violation that redefines a person in your eyes forever. As for me, the journey has been transformative. The first year was undeniably hard. There were days when the anger and betrayal felt as fresh as if it had happened hours before. There were nights I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom grief for the baby I thought we'd lost momentarily resurfacing, only to be replaced by the chilling memory of the truth. I threw myself into my work, not as an escape, but as a way to rebuild a part of my life that she hadn't tainted. I reconnected with old friends, the ones who had stood by me, offering unwavering support. And, crucially, I sought therapy. Talking it through with a professional, someone who could offer an objective perspective, helped me unpack the layers of trauma, to understand that her actions were a reflection of her own brokenness, not a measure of my worth. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to rebuild. I redecorated the house, purging it of her memories, making it my own sanctuary. I rediscovered hobbies I'd let slide during my marriage. I traveled a bit, saw new places, gained new perspectives. The architect in me started to design a new life, one built on a foundation of self-respect and hard-won wisdom. The pain, once a raging inferno, has now subsided to a dull ache, a scar that reminds me not just of the wound, but of the fact that I survived it, that I healed. I'm stronger now, more discerning, perhaps a little more cynical about the flawless facades people present, but also more appreciative of genuine kindness and honesty. About a year ago, I met someone. Her name is Emily. It was unexpected, certainly not something I was actively seeking. We met through a charity project I was volunteering my design skills for. She's a veterinarian, kind, compassionate, with an easy laugh and eyes that hold no secrets, only warmth. The contrast with Sarah couldn't be more profound. Our relationship developed slowly, cautiously on my part, but organically. She knows my story, not in every lurid detail, but the essence of it. She understands the shadows I carry, and instead of being scared off by them, she offered patience and understanding. With Emily, there are no games, no hidden agendas. There's just honesty, respect, and a quiet, steady affection that feels more real and grounding than the dramatic, performative love I once believed was the ideal. We're not rushing anything, just enjoying building something genuine, something true. I did have one final, accidental encounter with Sarah about 3 months ago. I was at a large home improvement store in a town I don't usually frequent, looking for some specific supplies for a renovation project Emily and I were doing at her clinic. I turned a corner in one of the aisles and there she was, looking at paint swatches. She looked diminished. Older than her years, lines of stress etched around her eyes and mouth, her clothes nondescript, a stark contrast to the vibrant, stylish woman I once knew. She saw me at the same moment. Her eyes widened, a flicker of something, panic, shame, hope, crossing her face. She opened her mouth as if to speak. I just gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a polite acknowledgement of a stranger you vaguely recognize, and then I turned and walked away, continuing my shopping. I didn't feel anger, or hatred, or even sadness anymore. If anything, it was a fleeting sense of pity, quickly replaced by a profound indifference. She was a chapter from a past life, a ghost. She had no power over me anymore. Looking back on it all, the whirlwind of betrayal and pain, it's tempting to be consumed by bitterness. But I choose not to be. What Sarah did was horrific, a violation of trust so profound it's hard to articulate. The faked miscarriage, using the idea of our lost child as a shield for her affair and her choices, was a unique kind of cruelty. It taught me a brutal lesson about the darkness people can carry, the lengths they'll go to for self-preservation, even at the cost of another's soul. But it also taught me about my own resilience, about the enduring strength of the human spirit to heal and rebuild. It showed me who my true friends were, the bedrock of support I could count on. And in a strange, twisted way, her betrayal cleared the path for me to find a different kind of happiness, a more authentic peace than I ever knew with her. Life goes on, and I choose to live mine fully, honestly, and with a heart that, while scarred, is still open to the possibility of good. The nightmare is over, and I'm finally awake. And that brings us to the end of today's story. Thank you so much for tuning in. I truly hope to see you again for more fascinating tales ahead. If you enjoyed it, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our next adventure. See you soon.